Defense, offense, things are changing around Orlando now that Scott Frost is back. Time to check in.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of every single day. Joining me is my main UCF man, Andrew Gluckow, UCF sports extraordinaire. You've been covering UCF for a very, very long time. You graduated from UCF. You know this program almost better than anyone, but you also know Scott Frost from his first stint at UCF. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the defensive reset, the offensive reboot, and building the trenches in Orlando, which will be a very, very important task on both offense and defense. Let's start with the defensive reset. Reports out of camp and the summer are that UCF is communicating better defensively than they ever have. Communication is up. Assignment discipline, as they termed it, is up. And this was a high priority after last season's mental breakdowns. Look, there's a solid voice. There's a lot of cohesion on that in the defensive meeting room right now. What do you make of the reports that UCF is now communicating at a higher level? I was both happy but a little terrified. Like, what were they doing before if they weren't communicating? But it's good to know that they're getting it fixed.
Well, I mean, this is, you hit the reset button. Alex Grinch is the defensive coordinator. He has a good amount of experience at the job, despite some mixed results. So, aside from that, you have a relatively new defense in. I mean, if you look at the potential starting lineup, you have maybe 3 up to 4, guys who were on the team last year in the starting lineup. So you're dealing with a lot of newbies. Nigel Kelly is back for 1 year. John Walker is back after missing a year due to injury. And then you have transfers like Sincere Edwards, who should have come to UCF. He was committed to UCF, and then he flipped to Pitt while he's back at UCF where he belongs. So you've got a lot of talent. You got the Henderson twins, Jacurri and Damari. Damari Henderson is lined up as a starting safety. Jacurri is in the depth for corner. But this is a very new defense. Much like the offense last year, it was meant to be a win now situation. There just wasn't much left in the tank afterwards. And, when a coach leaves, so does the rest of the team. So this is a brand new crew. Because it's brand new and you have so many transfers, it's a little more malleable. Guys aren't kind of set. Well, this is just the way we've done it. Well, it's a new staff. It's a new team. There is no way this is how we've done it. So you have the opportunity to hit that reset button, create some new habits. And communication's key. I mean, especially, between the offensive line and defense, those two places require so much communication because you've got to see what your hot routes are as far as guys moving, substitutions. Sometimes you got to play a little bit out of position if you can't substitute in time to make that matchup work. And you might need a little bit of help. So you have to make some adjustments on the fly. That's where the communications between the linebackers and the defensive backs becomes so important. We'll talk about the offensive line later, but that position group also requires massive amounts of communication. So it's great to hear that the defense has really put a lot of emphasis on communicating within themselves, because that could cause a lot of coverage breakdowns if it's not done properly.
The line play is going to be so important. Again, we'll talk about building the trenches, but I do want to talk about Nigel Kelly as one of the highest rated players returning to UCF on defense. How important is it for him that he rises to the top for these coordinators defensively this year and becomes a guy? Look, I mean, there's going to be a lot of pessimism around how much UCF can achieve in Scott Frost's first year. But, Nigel Kelly is one of those guys who can be a foundational building stone of what you want your football team to be in the future.
Absolutely. When everything kind of went up in smoke and coaches leave, players leave. It looked like Nigel Kelly is one of the guys going to be out the door, and he decided when the dust settled to stay. And as a result, he becomes one of the elder statesmen on this team. A returning player who understands the school and the culture they want. Pairing him up on the edge with Sincere Edwards on the other side makes a very dangerous combination. That's where you get a lot of those quarterback sacks. And that was an area that UCF really struggled with last year, was quarterback sacks. They didn't have a second edge runner that could really, really step up. I think this actually opens up Kelly to be able to do more damage because they don't have to focus so clearly on him. He's got a very capable guy working alongside him. And then you have a guy like John Walker, lined up a defensive tackle. That guy's a menace to society. And I mean, in the fact of he's brutal. He's strong. He's quick for a guy his size, and he'll cause mayhem on the line, which again will open up the avenues for those edge guys to make some, do some damage because they don't have to, you can't double team, Kelly and manage Walker. So, having these guys healthy and then a good amount of retooling really is going to help, set the stage for a very mean defensive line.
Agreed. Look, they've got some work to do, particularly in replacing key pieces on both sides of the ball. We're going to flip to the offensive side of the ball after a word from our sponsors and talk about these skill positions. We have not talked about the guys on the outside, the receivers, much. We're going to get into that next on Locked On UCF. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, and it's the NBA Finals. It's almost over, but the intensity, the buzzer beaters, fans losing their minds, it's kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. I was just on the app, and Zone Deals were offering 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA World Cup matchups. So you can go check that out if you want to check out some soccer. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 your first offer. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, low prices, guaranteed. What time is it? Game time. Andrew, on the offensive side of the ball, we talk a lot about the quarterback race, and we'll continue to talk about that as the offseason progresses, and we get a little closer to fall camp. Big 12 Media Days is coming up. Scott Frost is going to be asked a lot of questions about his quarterbacks. But the guys catching balls from them on the outside is something we have not talked about a lot, and I wanted to get into that a little bit here today. Look, Kobe Hudson is gone. There's a lot of guys in that wide receiver room that are gone. Talk to me about the skill guys on the outside and how they project in Scott Frost's first year back in Orlando. Will we see a lot of usage out of the wide receivers this year?
Well, I mean, you're going to have to a certain extent. You have some talented running backs. With, as we talked about, Miles Montgomery and Jay Nixon. But the wide receivers are going to have to step up, and you have basically a new crew. Almost the entirety of all receiving yards by the wide receivers and tight ends have to be fully replaced. And that's not easy. There's injuries have already, struck. Day Farmer, who is looking to be a very exciting and productive wide receiver this year, is out. He got hurt during off-season programs. He's out. So your starting lineup's going to be, looks like it's going to be potentially 3 different transfers. You got Marcus Black out of University of Florida, redshirt senior, in his final year of eligibility. Doesn't have a whole lot of stats behind him, not a lot of numbers. Did play against UCF. He started a lot, but didn't really get the ball a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how how he can rise up when he's a little bit more of the focal point of the offense. The guy I'm interested in is DJ Black, who's a transfer from Limestone, a Division II school, but he also, started at South Carolina. This is a talented wide receiver who definitely flew under the radar. And I think he's going to turn some heads, before it's all said and done. Because as you know, a good quarterback, is important, but great receivers can really help a quarterback get better.
Yes, correct.
And the last guy is transferred from Charlotte, Dwayne Thomas. He, as far as his Division I FBS numbers, he's the largest out of these three guys as far as how much production wise. But as far as the expectation, I think he's third on this list. But then you have at tight end, you have Dylan Wade, who's a transfer from Maryland, who's got a good chance of starting. And he actually has he caught 29 passes last year, over 300 yards, a couple touchdowns. This is a guy that's got a lot of usage. So it would not surprise me if the team has to rely on tight ends a little bit, especially as the team kind of tries to figure itself out. When Scott Frost had his last tenure, he had Jordan Akins as a tight end, and obviously that's an NFL talent right there. Dylan Wade is not Jordan Akins, who was a freakish athlete, but again, as Scott Frost said when he first came into the press conference, he said he's going to work with what he's got, and he brought in a lot of transfers. But this is not the final product. This is a transition team where you get a few freshmen that fit your mold. You've got some transfers that you can get as much. You're going to try to get as much out of, but they're not really the guys you truly want. This is a step between, and if he can at least maximize the productivity out of these players, they may be able to surprise you a little.
Yeah, look, you lose over 40. You had two guys who were about 45% of your production from the wide receiver position last year. Jacoby Jones gone, Kobe Hudson gone, right? Like,
they're all gone.
They're all gone, right? Like, this is gonna be a whole new group of pass catchers here for Scott Frost in his first year. So, look, wide receiver is one of those positions where you are in the least control of your destiny. You can run the perfect route. You can beat your guy. You can be exactly where you're supposed to be. And if the quarterback doesn't deliver the football or doesn't see you, you cannot get a good outcome. So it's going to be important that these guys, like you said, help raise the floor for these quarterbacks here in year one with Scott Frost back. And it'll have a lot to say whether UCF can exceed expectations in spots. We talked about that early season, a matchup with North Carolina and Bill Belichick in the those games won't be about showcasing the talent in my book. It's going to be about showcasing the coaching, right? How well can Scott Frost scheme up stuff that makes his guys better than the other guys on that day? Because you just have to be better that day. You don't need to be the better team.
Survive in advance. Survive in advance. That's what it comes down. It's not going to be about showboating. But I do want to point out one thing. Both Marcus Burke and DJ Black are 6'3" wide receivers. So they've got some height. There's value to that because obviously you can't teach height. Unfortunately, Dwayne Thomas, not a tall guy, 5'8", $175. I mean, not a big guy, but UCF does have other players that can rotate in. But if you have your two starting wide receivers that are at least 6'3", I think that really helps out the quarterback.
Yeah, and catch radius is going to be so important, right? Having guys you can throw up that can go win 50-50 balls. As you mentioned, you can't teach height. You either have it or you don't. If you have guys who are tall and can jump high and can catch anything thrown within 3 yards of them, certainly that's going to be an advantage, I think, for UCF offensively. So we'll see how that plays out. Look, the skill positions aren't the only place where they need to make improvements. You've got to win the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. We'll talk about how UCF does that and where they're at in that process next on Locked On UCF. UCF has got to win the line of scrimmage. Let's start on the offensive line here. You bemoaned pass protection a lot last year. Podcast after podcast, we sat down to record, and you almost lost your mind watching this offensive line play. How does Scott Frost begin laying a good offensive line foundation here in his first year?
Well, if you look at the team now, they are like riddled with transfers. At least three of the five starters next year are likely going to be transfers that are new in 2025. In the case of Keegan Smith, he's a transfer, but he was on the team last year. I do want to point out that UCF actually has a homegrown talent here in Paul Rubel, who's a fan favorite, mostly because of his size and the fact he's just, a classy guy, but he's 6'10", which I actually view as a negative because there's a certain point where you get so tall, it's hard to get low, and leverage is everything in the offensive line. He's currently slated to be right tackle. He is a redshirt senior, but he is not from any other school. He started as a freshman at UCF. So that's a rare one right there. As I said, Keegan Smith. But then you have the three transfers who are likely going to be on the left side of the line. Carter Miller, who is a transfer from Louisiana Monroe, and James Madison. He's a redshirt junior, so they do have him for a little bit. And then they have a guard, Memelar, who is from Washington, pulling from the Big Ten. I think there's going to be high expectations as far as how he does as the left guard, redshirt senior. And then Jacurri Leftwich, also a redshirt senior, coming from North Carolina and Georgia Tech. So he's going to have a chance to play against his former team this coming year. I'm sure he's jazzed about that.
Yeah. On the defensive side of the ball, again, I mentioned Nigel Kelly at the edge position, but they've got to get that pass rush going so that the DBs aren't left out on an island next season. Talk to me about the defensive line and how they can make strides there. Kind of looking at, we know Lee Hunter is gone. I think he transferred to Texas Tech.
Yeah, he's gone.
Right. Quadric Bullard.
That hurt.
Yeah, I think returns. Malachi Lawrence, some names here that played a lot of snaps. You've got to get better on the defensive line. You've got to put pressure on the quarterback, but mostly you need to stop the run. You've got to be able to fill those gaps and not allow opposing team running backs to make it to the second level. How does UCF project right now with the guys you see that left and the guys coming in, to stop the run and get after the quarterback?
I think this is the best unit on the team as it currently is on paper. Nigel Kelly, we know. John Walker, we know. We've seen them. Obviously, Walker missed last year, but we saw him as a freshman, a true freshman, and he was just absolute terror. Now that he's a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and a little bit stronger, he's going to be even worse for opposing teams. We talked about Sincere Edwards, who is very talented defensive end, going to be on the other side. And then you have Horace Lockett, who is a transfer from Georgia Tech, had a few tackles for loss last year. As you know, defensive tackles, it could be a struggle to get sacks. He's a nose tackle, 6'6", 315. I mean, you got some beef there, and that's something that UCF has struggled with over the years, is getting big enough guys in the trenches where they need them. And you have some depth here. Malachi Lawrence, very talented, defensive end. He's going to be rotating quite a bit. And same with Isaiah Nixon, a redshirt sophomore, but very talented guy. This is the strongest unit in my opinion. We talked about the running backs being great, but I think this is actually a better top to bottom unit as far as combination of talent, experience, and results. I'm very excited to see the defensive line in action. It's been a while since I've really been able to embrace that. But I think more so than the offensive line, which again has been a much maligned unit, I think these guys are going to surprise a lot of people where they struggled last year with pass pressuring and sacks. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people and create some results.
Oh, man. You heard it here first on Locked On UCF. Andrew Gluckow said this is the best position group on the team, the defensive line. I think that bodes well if you're Scott Frost. Like I said, these guys don't get a lot of praise. Those guys in the trenches don't get a lot of praise, but when they're not good at what they do, certainly they hear about it. It's those small things, right, that they do game in and game out that help, a good team win football games. So they'll continue to build the lines here. We're going to track that progress as we come out of the summer, headed into fall camp. Look, great conversation. Will be an ongoing one as we cover more position groups. Again, we're going to track progress in summer workouts, and then going into fall camp, we'll do some position group battles to talk about how guys are fighting for jobs here. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me, guys. That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Do us a favor, hit subscribe on the channel. Help us. We're in the race to 1,000 subscribers, and we're almost there. You can help us get there. Thank you for making us your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.